Maria Alvarez had always believed that heartbreak was something that happened slowly, quietly, like a candle burning itself down without anyone noticing until the last flicker vanished, but she never imagined her own heart would dim in the months leading up to that life-altering Thursday afternoon when a trembling young intern rushed into the hospital cafeteria where she worked and uttered the sentence that shattered every wall she had built around her grief. "Ma'am, your daughter needs you now." Words that sliced through the fog of exhaustion and sadness that had settled over her since her daughter, 16-year-old Elena, had pulled away from her after their worst argument, a night Maria replayed every evening with painful clarity, remembering the way rain hammered against the windows as they fought about trust, curfews, choices, school, and the boy Maria feared would derail her daughter's future, a boy who reminded her too much of mistakes she herself had made at 17 when she mistook recklessness for love. A mistake that led her into a marriage defined by shouting matches, slammed doors, and eventually abandonment, leaving her to raise Elena alone, determined to protect her daughter from repeating the same painful cycle. But in her fierce attempts at protection, Maria had forgotten the delicate line between concern and control, and when Elena finally shouted, "You don't trust me at all," before storming into her room, locking the door, and leaving a small crack in her mother's heart that widened every day afterward, Maria didn't know how to fix it. She tried knocking on Elena's door, tried talking through the silence, tried making her favorite dishes, tried leaving gentle notes on her desk, but each attempt was met with polite, distant responses: "Thanks, Mom, I'm busy," later, words that were not cruel, but hollow, undeniably carrying the weight of someone building emotional distance to protect themselves. And though Maria wanted to reach through that distance, her own fear held her still, whispering that if she pushed too hard, she might break whatever fragile connection remained, so she drowned herself in routine, waking at 4:45 a.m. every morning, packing lunches, brewing coffee, ironing her uniform, and commuting to St. Andrew's Hospital where she served meals, cleaned tables, and watched strangers pass by with their own stories while her own remained stuck in a loop of regret, until one afternoon, as the lunch rush dwindled and Maria was wiping down the counter, she heard hurried footsteps followed by the young intern, face pale, breath ragged, eyes wide with urgency as he stammered, "Ma'am, are you Maria Alvarez?" And when she nodded, the world shifted beneath her feet, time slowing, sounds dulling, a cold dread rising through her ribs as the intern continued, "Your daughter, she needs you now," words that hit her harder than any blow she had ever endured, harder than the night her husband walked out, harder than the months of silence from Elena, because in an instant, Maria's mind conjured every nightmare a mother could imagine. An accident, an attack, a health emergency, a terrible mistake, and without thinking, she let the cleaning rag fall from her hand as she sprinted through the swinging cafeteria doors, following the intern who wove through hallways with anxious urgency, her heartbeat thundering loud enough to drown out everything else, her thoughts spiraling out of control as she whispered frantic prayers, each one pleading for her daughter's safety. And by the time they reached the emergency department, her hands were shaking so violently she could barely push the curtain aside, but when she finally stepped inside, expecting the worst, she froze at the sight of Elena sitting on the exam bed, shoulders trembling, tears streaking her cheeks, a bruise forming on her arm, and wide, terrified eyes that made her look far younger than 16, far more fragile than the stubborn, sharp-tongued teenager who had been avoiding her for months. And in that split second, Maria felt every ounce of guilt crush her because despite all the distance, despite the coldness, despite the arguments, the only person Elena had asked for in her moment of fear was her mother. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped aside to give them space, saying softly, "She's been asking for you," and those 6 words nearly brought Maria to her knees because they were proof that the bond between them, strained, bruised, wounded, was not broken, merely buried under pain neither had known how to address. And as Maria approached slowly, afraid she might startle her daughter, she whispered, "Sweetheart, I'm here," and Elena's lips quivered before she released a sob so full of vulnerability that Maria rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her, holding her as tightly as she did when she was 4 years old and afraid of thunderstorms, and for several long moments, they clung to each other, tears mixing, breaths unsteady, the months of emotional distance evaporating as instinct, love, and fear bound them back together. When Elena finally calmed enough to speak, her voice was small, hoarse, trembling as she whispered, "Mom, something happened, prompting Maria to stroke her hair gently and murmur, "I'm listening, baby," and Elena explained through uneven breaths that she had been walking home alone after school, her mind spiraling from a heated conversation she'd had earlier with the same boy Maria disapproved of, Leo, a boy who hadn't shown up when he promised, who ignored her messages, who spread rumors she didn't know how to confront, leaving her distracted, unfocused, barely noticing her surroundings as she took a shortcut behind a construction site, and in her distraction, she slipped on loose gravel, falling hard onto her side, scraping her palms, hitting her arm badly enough that she couldn't lift it without searing pain, and though a few people passed by, none stopped to help, and her phone battery was nearly dead, and she realized with crushing clarity that the only person she desperately wanted in that moment of panic, pain, and fear was her mother, despite all the tension between them, because even when she was mad at Maria, she had never stopped loving her, never stopped trusting her, and never stopped believing that her mother was the one person who would show up without hesitation. As she spoke, Maria's guilt deepened, not because of the accident, but because Elena had been hurting long before she fell, hurting in ways Maria hadn't seen or had been too afraid to address, and when the doctor returned to examine Elena's arm, diagnosing a moderate sprain with severe bruising but no fracture, Maria stayed right beside her, holding her hand, murmuring soothing words, helping steady her breathing whenever she winced from the pressure of the wrap being applied, and by the time the discharge papers were ready, Maria knew that the accident was not the real emergency. Her daughter's emotional wounds were far deeper, far more urgent than the physical ones. As they stepped outside into the chilly evening air, Elena leaning into her slightly for support, Maria wrapped an arm around her shoulders and asked softly, "Sweetheart, what's really going on?" And after a long moment of hesitation, Elena confessed everything: the pressure of school, the fear of disappointing her mother, the loneliness she felt at home because she didn't know how to talk to Maria without feeling judged, the heartbreak caused by Leo's manipulations, the way she had convinced herself she shouldn't bother Maria with her troubles because her mother already seemed tired, already seemed burdened, already seemed disappointed, and Maria's chest ached as she listened because she had never intended for her daughter to feel like a burden, never intended to seem unreachable, and she squeezed Elena's hand, whispering, "I'm not disappointed in you, I'm scared of losing you," and Elena's breath hitched as fresh tears formed, because she too had feared losing her mother, feared the silence between them would solidify into something permanent, and in that shared confession, something inside both of them cracked open, something tender, something raw, something healing. As they walked toward the bus stop, Maria asked gently, "Do you want to talk about Leo?" And Elena nodded, explaining how he'd pressured her into things she didn't want, how he'd made her feel like she had to choose between him and her mother, how he'd told her Maria didn't understand her, didn't respect her, didn't care about her happiness, and Maria felt fury ignite inside her but forced herself to stay calm, knowing her daughter needed understanding, not anger, so she said quietly, "Real love never asks you to choose between the people who truly care about you," and for the first time in months, Elena believed her, because Maria's presence, warm, steady, unwavering, made her realize how unsafe she had felt with someone who never showed up for her, someone who made her feel small, confused, uncertain, and unloved. On the bus ride home, Elena rested her head on her mother's shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was 12, and Maria resisted the urge to cry, instead stroking her daughter's hair gently as the city lights passed by outside the window, each one a reminder that life could change in a single moment, that healing could begin with a single sentence, even one spoken in fear by a nervous intern. When they arrived home, Maria warmed soup and guided Elena to the couch, wrapping her in a blanket, helping her take pain medication, treating her with the same gentle care she had when Elena was a child with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks. And as Elena watched her mother move around the kitchen, she whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry," and Maria turned, shaking her head, replying softly, "We both made mistakes, but we're here now," and those words settled into the quiet room like a balm, soothing, mending, softening old wounds. Later that night, as Elena drifted to sleep with her head in Maria's lap, Maria brushed strands of hair from her forehead and thought about how close she had come to letting fear and pride deprive her of this moment, of this connection, and she vowed silently that she would never again hide behind silence, that she would be brave enough to have hard conversations, to apologize first, to listen more, to show her daughter that love was not about being perfect but about showing up. Again, and again, and again. When Elena stirred and murmured, "Mom." Maria whispered, "I'm here," and Elena smiled weakly before falling asleep once more. And in that moment Maria realized that the sentence that had terrified her, "Ma'am, your daughter needs you now," had also saved her, had shaken her awake, had reminded her that motherhood wasn't about avoiding mistakes but about repairing them, learning from them, and walking beside her daughter even when the path grew dark. And as she watched her sleeping child, Maria felt her heart, once dimmed, once heavy, glow again, bright and steady, no longer burning down but reigniting with hope, love, and the promise of a second chance.